In his office at Much Benham, Colonel Melchett reviewed and examined his subordinates' reports carefully. Inspector Slack was concluding his remarks, saying, "So, everything seems completely clear, sir." Mrs. Pantry sat in the library after dinner and went to bed a little before 10. She turned off the lights before leaving the room, and it is assumed that no one entered the library afterward. The servants went to bed at 10:30, and Lorimer went to bed at 11:15. No one heard anything unusual except for the third maid, who heard many things: moans, a blood-curdling scream, and footsteps of evil, and I don't know what else. The second maid, who shares a room with her, said that the other girl slept through the night without making a sound. Such people who invent things cause us all the trouble. What about the window that was broken into? Simmons says it was amateurish work. It was opened with a regular pair of pliers in the usual manner, and it didn't make much noise. The pliers must have been thrown near the house, but no one has found them. Do you think any of the servants know anything? Inspector Slack answered, as if reluctant, "No, sir, I don't think they know anything. They all seem shocked and upset. I had my suspicions about Lorimer." He was reserved in his speech, if you know what I mean, but I don't think he has anything. Melchett nodded his head, not attaching much importance to Lorimer's reticence, as the active Inspector Slack often imposed such behavior on those he was investigating. The door opened, and Dr. Haydock entered, saying, "I thought I'd come by to give you an overall account of the medical situation." "Yes, I'm glad to see you." "Well, go ahead." "There isn't much, as one might imagine. The death was due to strangulation. A satin belt taken from her own dress was wrapped around the neck and pulled from the back. It could be done easily and simply, and wouldn't require much force. That is, if the girl was taken by surprise. There are no signs of resistance." "What about the time of death? Let's say it happened between 10 and midnight. Can't you determine a more precise time?" "I can't risk my professional reputation. Not before 10 and not after midnight." "And which of these times do you personally lean towards?" "That depends on many factors. The fire was burning in the hearth, so the room was warm, which would delay the body's cooling in rigor mortis." "Is there anything more you can tell us about the girl?" "Not much. She was young, I'd say around 17 or 18, of the type who was in very good health." Nodding his head, the doctor left the room. Melchett said to the inspector, "Are you certain she was never seen before in the Gossington house?" The servants confirmed this, and they were quite indignant about it. They say they would have remembered her if they had seen her before in the area. I suppose they would indeed know her. A girl of that sort would be noticed from a mile away. Take, for example, that young woman with Blake. It's unfortunate it wasn't her. We might have been able to make progress then. The chief of police mused, "It seems to me that this girl came from London without a doubt. I don't think we will find any local leads here, and in that case, I suppose we should call in Scotland Yard. The case is theirs, not ours." Slack said, "Nevertheless, something must have brought her here." Then he added cautiously, "It seems to me that Colonel Pantry and his wife know something." "Without a doubt. I know, of course, that they are friends of yours, sir. You can be assured that I've considered all possibilities." "All possibilities." Then he said, "I assume you've checked the list of missing persons?" Slack nodded, then pulled out a printed sheet and said, "Here they are. Mrs. Saunders, reported missing a week ago. Black-haired, blue-eyed, 36 years old. Not her. Moreover, everyone knows, except her husband, that she ran away with a merchant from Leeds. Mrs. Bernard, who is 65, Pamela Reeves, who is 16, reported missing last night, had attended a Girl Scouts festival, brown hair in a ponytail, 5 feet tall and—" Melchett interrupted, annoyed, "Don't go into the tedious details, Slack. The victim wasn't a schoolgirl, and in my opinion, she—" He stopped due to the ringing of the telephone, picked up the receiver, and said, "Hello? Yes, Much Benham Police Station. What? Just a moment, please." He listened while writing quickly, then spoke again with a new tone of excitement. "Ruby Kane, 18 years old, profession, professional dancer, 5 feet 4 inches tall, slender, platinum blonde hair, blue eyes, with a high-cut dress, believed to be wearing a white evening gown. Is that correct?" "What? Yes, I see no doubt. I'll send Slack immediately." He hung up and looked at his subordinate with rising excitement and said, "I think we've identified her." That was from the police in Alnshire, Glenshire in the neighboring county. They reported a girl missing from the Majestic Hotel in Dinmouth. Dinmouth? That fits with this case. Dinmouth was a modern resort on the nearby coast. Colonel Melchett said it was no more than 18 miles from here. The girl worked as a dancer at the hotel and didn't show up for her performance last night. The hotel management was very upset about it, and when she failed to appear this morning, the police were notified. The other girls or someone is worried about her. It seems a bit mysterious. It's best for you to go to Dinmouth right away. Slack. Put yourself there under the responsibility of Chief Inspector Harper and cooperate with him. Activity had always been what Inspector Slack enjoyed: to rush in a car, to rudely silence those eager to inform him of matters, and to cut conversations short due to the call of urgent necessity. All of that was the spirit of life for Slack. And so he arrived in Dinmouth in an incredibly short time, presenting himself at the police station, where he met the frightened, distracted hotel manager. He then left that manager with a somewhat dubious sense of relief, saying, "You must first make sure that she is indeed the girl before we begin our proceedings." He soon drove his car back to Mitch Benham, accompanied by one of Ruby Keane's closest relatives. He had made a phone call with Muntash Bitham before leaving Dinmouth, so the police chief was prepared for his arrival, although he was not ready for the brief introduction that Slack made, saying, "This is my husband, sir." The police chief stared at his subordinate coldly and felt that Slack. He gave his mind a vacation. The young woman who had just gotten out of the car came to save the situation, saying with her beautiful white teeth shining for a moment, "This is the name they know me by professionally. My partner and I have called ourselves Raymond and Josie, and of course, the whole hotel knows me by the name. My real name is Josephine Turner." Colonel Melchett adjusted himself to handle the situation and invited Miss Turner to sit down while giving her a quick professional glance. She was a beautiful young woman, perhaps closer to 30 than to 20. Her beauty relied more on careful grooming and expert makeup than on the features themselves. She appeared competent, with a calm demeanor and sound, rational judgment. She wasn't the type that could be described as starry-eyed, yet she possessed a certain charm. She had adorned herself with makeup so skillfully that the eye could hardly perceive it, and she wore a well-tailored black suit. Although she appeared anxious and disturbed, the colonel decided that grief had not overwhelmed her too much. She said while sitting, "This seems too awful to be real. Do we really think it's Ruby? I fear that this is what we will ask you to answer, and I worry that it may be unpleasant and bothersome for you." Miss Turner said with concern, "Is it? Does it seem awful? In fact, I fear it might be a shock for you. Is it? Do you want me to look at it directly now? I think this is better, Miss Turner, as it is not productive to ask you questions before we make sure it is best for you to finish. What do you think about that?" "It's okay." Then they got up and headed to the morgue, and when Josie came out again after her brief visit to the morgue, she looked a bit nauseous and said shakily, "It's definitely Ruby. Oh, poor thing. My God, I feel a strange sensation." I called around asking, "Is there no lemon or refreshing drink?" The lemonade was not available, so they brought her water instead. After she drank a little, Miss Turner regained her composure and said frankly, "Seeing something like this is quite alarming, isn't it? Oh, poor little Rubia. Oh, the men are such deceivers." "Do you think he was a man?" My wife seemed a bit surprised and said, "Wasn't he a man?" "I mean, it's natural that I thought he." "Were you thinking of any specific man?" It raised her head, firmly denying and said, "No, I have no idea about that. Naturally, Ruby wouldn't have told me if she. What if it were?" She hesitated, then said, "If only it had been graduating with someone." Melchett threw her a sharp glance and didn't say more until they returned to his office. "There," he began by saying, "Now, Miss Turner, I want everything. The information you can provide me with." "Yes, of course. Where should I start?" "I want the girl's full name, her address, and her relationship to you. And everything you know about her." Josephine Turner nodded her head, and Mylanchett confirmed his opinion that she wasn't feeling a deep sorrow. True, she was shocked and saddened, but not more than that. She spoke with deadly speed. "Her name was Ruby Keane. I mean, that is her stage name. Her real name was Rosie Legg, and her mother was my aunt's cousin. I have known her all my life, but my knowledge of her has not been particularly deep, if you know what I mean. I have many cousins, some in the business world and some in theater. Ruby was training to become a dancer and participated last year in some good performances in mime dance. It wasn't really of a high standard, but they were good troupes from the provinces. Since then, she has been working as one of the secondary dancers in the Ballet de Danse in Brixton, South London, which is a respectable place where the girls receive good care, but there isn't much there. From financial gain. I paused for a moment, and Colonel Mellencamp gestured, saying, "And now it's my turn. I used to be a hostess overseeing the dancing and card games at the Majestic Hotel in Denmark for 3 years. It was a good job, rewarding and entertaining. You take care of the customers when they arrive, after estimating their levels. Of course, some prefer to be left alone, while others feel lonely and want to seek entertainment. You try to match people who enjoy card games, bridge, and so on. The matter requires to a little bit of tact and experience." He tilted his head again and thought that this girl could be skilled at her job, as he noticed she had a cheerful and friendly demeanor and was sharp-witted, even though she lacked any intellectual culture. My wife continued, saying, "In addition, I perform 2 showcase dances every night with Raymond Starr, who is a tennis coach as well as presenting my dance segments. However, this summer, I slipped on a rock while at the beach one day and suffered a severe sprain in my ankle." Milchett had noticed that she walked with a slight limp, and she continued, "Naturally, this will prevent me from dancing for a while. It was a terrible situation, and I didn't want the hotel to have to hire a girl. Change it, for this is a serious matter, as you know." And for a moment, her calm blue eyes sharpened, and she became a woman fighting for her existence. She kept saying, "Such a thing could ruin my chances." So I thought of Ruby and suggested to the manager that I call her in so I could continue in the role of supervising the card game while Ruby would just dance. I wanted to keep it within the family, if you know what I mean. Milchett said that he understands her. It was approved, so I messaged Ruby and she came here. It's an opportunity for her, as it's a higher level than any job she has done before. That was about a month ago. Colonel Melchett said, "I understand. Have you achieved success?" My wife said nonchalantly, "Yes, I have succeeded beyond any doubt. She doesn't dance with the grace that I do, but Raymond is clever and has succeeded in training her, and she was beautiful. She was slender, blonde, and had a childlike, naive face. She tended to overdo her makeup a little, and I had warned her about it several times, but you know how girls are. She hadn't yet turned 18, and at that age, girls always tend to exaggerate in such matters. This didn't quite fit the upscale place like the Majestic Hotel, and I always reminded her of that. I urge her to lighten her makeup and to be moderate with it." Year of your birth, did people love her? Ah, yes, and don't forget that Ruby was a bit silly, so she was more accepted by older men than by young ones. Did she have any special friend? The girl's eyes met his in complete understanding, and she said, "Not in the way you mean, or at least she didn't have such a friend as far as I know. And if she did, she wouldn't be telling me." Milchett wondered for a moment about the reason that led the girl to hide that from her relative. After all, Josie did not give the impression of being a strict disciplinarian, but he simply said, "Can you tell me when you last saw your relative?" "Last night. She and Raymond performed 2 showcase dances every night, one at 10:30 and the other at midnight. They had finished their first dance, and then I noticed that Ruby was dancing with one of the young men staying at the hotel. I was playing bridge with some people at the club, and there was a glass barrier between the lobby and the dance hall. That was the last time I saw her. Just after midnight, Raymond approached me, looking worried, and asked about her. She then appeared just as it was time to start the next dance, and I was quite annoyed. This was an example of the silly behavior that girls exhibit, which frustrates the management to the point of expelling them. I went up to her room with him, but she wasn't there. I noticed that she had changed her clothes. The dress she had danced in, which was red, was thrown over one of the chairs, even though her habit was to stay in the same dress. I didn't know where I had gone, so we asked the band to play a piece. Additional music, yet Ruby did not show up. I told Raymond that I would perform the showcase dance with him, and we chose a dance that was easier on my ankles and made it short. However, it still caused my ankles to hurt a lot, to the point that they were swollen this morning. Ruby still did not appear, and we sat up waiting for her until 2 in the morning. I have been extremely angry with her." Her voice trembled slightly, and Milchett felt a genuine tone of anger in it, and for a brief moment, he was surprised. Her reaction seemed a bit stronger than the facts warranted. He was left with the feeling that something had been deliberately overlooked and left unsaid. He said, "And this morning, when Ruby didn't come back and found her bed still made, she went to the police, right?" He knew from the brief Slack call with Dinmouth that things hadn't gone that way, but he wanted to hear what Josephine Tudor had to say. She did not hesitate. She said, "No, I did not do that." "Why didn't you do it, Miss Tudor?" Her eyes met his openly, and she said, "You wouldn't do that if you were in my place." "Do you think so? I have a job I need to think about, and a scandal is not something. No hotel desires this, especially if it could lead to police intervention. I didn't think that anything had happened to Ruby, not for a single moment. I thought she was just putting on a show and went out with some guy, and I definitely thought she was pretending. I would have scolded her harshly when they returned, if it weren't for the girls. The 18th are completely oblivious." Milchett pretended to look at the notes in front of him and then said, "Ah, yes, I see that a man named Mr. Jefferson is the one who went to the police. Was one of the guests staying at the hotel?" Josephine Turner replied succinctly, "Yes." "And what made Mr. Jaffer do that?" Josie was stroking her jacket and there was a sense of restraint in her demeanor. Colonel Milchett felt once again that she possessed something we did not wish to reveal. Then she said with a hint of bitterness, "It's a seat. He gets easily agitated. I mean because he is disabled." Milchett left the topic and asked her, "Who was that young man you saw your cousin dancing with last time?" "His name was Bartlett, and he had been staying at the hotel for about 10 days. Were they in a close relationship?" "Not specifically, I think, and that's what I don't know about." "Anyway," a strange tone of anger emerged in her voice again. "What did the young man say?" "He said that Ruby went upstairs after their dance. She is getting ready with her adornments." "Was this when she changed her clothes?" "I think so." "Is this the last thing you know?" And then the girl disappeared. It faded away. "Yes, that's true." "Did Miss Keene know anyone at St. Mary's Mead? Or in this area?" "I don't know. Maybe she knew someone, as many young people come to the Majestic Hotel in Dinmouth from all the surrounding areas. And I wouldn't have known where they live if they hadn't mentioned it themselves." "Have you ever heard your relative mention Fousington? Is it Washington?" Confusion was clearly visible on my husband's face, so Colonel Milchett said, "Gosington Hole. Absolutely not." She shook her head and said with a light tone of acceptance, "I haven't heard." There was also curiosity in her tone, so Colonel Milchett explained to her, "Gosington Hall is the house where the body was crossed." I stared at him and said, "Gosington Hall? How strange that is." Milton thought to himself, "How strange that is, indeed," but aloud he asked, "Do you know a colonel or a lady by the name of Pantry?" She shook her head in denial again. "Or a gentleman named Basil Blake?" She frowned slightly and said, "I think I've heard that name before. Yes, I am sure I heard it, but I don't remember anything about it." The vigilant inspector slid a piece of paper he had torn from his notebook across the table to his superior, on which he had written in pencil, "Colonel Pantry dined at the Majestic Hotel last week." The past. Milchett raised his gaze to meet the inspector's eyes, and the police chief's face turned red. Slack was a diligent officer, very strict, and Milchett didn't like him much, but he couldn't ignore him. The challenge. The inspector was implicitly accusing him of favoring the children of his own class by covering for an old school friend. I turned to my husband and said, "It's urgent. I want you to. Would you accompany me to Gosington Hall if you don't mind?" With coldness and defiance, as if on the verge of ignoring a murmur. My husband agreed. Milchett's eyes met Slack's,